Welcome, Joe. I am honored and excited to have a conversation with someone I've been following for I don't know how long, but quite some time. And you caught my attention with an email recently, so I have you just chime in and share what's going on with you, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much, Shilpa, for having me on the podcast. I love this theme that you're doing with energy awareness. I think it's something that um, a few years ago I would have probably felt like pre-pandemic Joe was very like men are a certain way. And then like when I was at home, my wife's a nurse, and so during the pandemic, I was watching my kids at home most of the time. And when the rubber meets the road, right, you really find your values and who you are as a person. And I realized that, um, whatever I thought a man was, um, before then, I realized that the most important thing a man could be to, at least in my situation, is there for his family and supportive of his family. And energy awareness is something that I've been um, focused on because I do run a business full time. I run three podcasts. I have three small kids, and I want to be fully present for them while also being able to support them in my work. And my wife, of course, but my wife's a nurse. Like she's better than I am. So
Well, you certainly are aware of the value of each of those parts of your life. And clearly, I mean, your wife is probably holding up a huge part of this energy awareness facet of the family. I mean, being a nurse is no small feat. But also, I think it's enlightening that you express like you have three podcasts, three children, and all of those things require energy.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's I mean, as we record this, I was recently asked to um kind of lead the home and school association for my oldest, or well, for my two oldest now school. Um and that's a time commitment, but it's also a way for me to be active in the school community and in their lives, and maybe have a role to play in the extracurriculars that they get to be a part of. And so, um, as I approach my business, right, you reached out, but I think the week that I uh, rebranded my podcast from how I built it to Streamlined Solopreneur. And one of the reasons that I did that was because I realized that the way I was running my business with no kids or one kid was unsustainable as the number of children my wife and I have grew.
I'm a mother of one, and even with that, I find it, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I do find it challenging to do all the things you want to do. And I'm an older mom, so there's the desire to truly be present from a different perspective because you've lived a life out there. Like before I hit record, I mentioned I spent over 20 years in corporate, and the challenges of being a solopreneur has been overwhelming. So when your email came out a few weeks ago, I believe, about going into this realm of solopreneurship streamlining, I,
Hmm. Yeah.
I believe that it piqued my curiosity immediately. I think it was moments later. I'm like, "Hey Joe, do you want to talk about this on my podcast?" And I'm coming at it from a very I is the word selfish right? Maybe it's selfish. I'm like, I want to know. And maybe my avatars, my listeners who are often, I could consider them soulful individuals, whether it's women or men, who are pivoting, transitioning, or as solopreneurs, they want to know, how do you streamline life so that you can be more present in the now?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I want to start by saying, I think as a parent of any number of kids, it could feel selfish, like self care could feel selfish, right? Like I just need a few minutes to myself, but my kid needs me. Um, Something that really sticks out for me is I went to a Jesuit college, and we learned about St. Thomas Aquinas. And something I learned about near 20 years ago at this point, that has stayed with me this whole time is St. Thomas saying, um, self care isn't selfish. You need to take care of yourself if you're going to effectively take care of others. And so, I think it's really important, and it's not selfish to be like, hey, I need some time to myself. My wife and I have a little code that if we can tell one of us is getting frustrated or we're not being our best selves, we'll say, for our kids, we'll just be like, hey, it looks like you need some time, right? And most of the time we will accept that and walk away and let the other take control of the situation because they're a little bit more fresh. Um, and then all it takes is a little bit of time for you to settle down and kind of find your center and then be able to be fully present. So I just wanted to say that right off the bat because um, I think having that mindset is really important, because it is easy to be like, oh well, I'm going out and my kids said they missed me and I feel selfish now. But if you want to be there for your kids, then you need to be a little bit selfish and take care of yourself. And this is what kind of led me to rebrand my podcast and focus on this because I think now this is anecdotal. I obviously didn't do the research on this, but it really feels to me that a lot of the advice that we see online is grow, hire a team, hustle. I wake up at 4 a.m. and I meditate for 2 hours. Then I take an ice bath. Then I hustle. Um, I wake up at 5:30, try to do yoga before my kids wake up, and hope I have a hot cup of coffee. Like those. So I feel like a lot of the advice we see online is not for parents, at least like in the business world, we'll say, right? Because like I mean Instagram, like parent Instagram is one of the realest things on the internet, but in the business world we don't see a lot of parent centric advice, and I want to change that with my podcast. My target audience is busy solopreneur parents.
As well as for myself, while not everyone would be a parent necessarily, I coined the term soulful, those who are in a stage of life that they are aware. They're aware. Like sometimes you become aware because you're a parent and you're witnessing this beautiful soul blossom, and you
Mm-hmm.
want to be more there and more now. But it could also be later in life for some others who are transitioning or pivoting. And you're like, you know what? I'm not going to necessarily want to do these unrealistic things. And maybe they're realistic for business people, but like you were saying, the 4:30 and the cold shower and the hustle and the going to the high intensity gym. And I've at different stages tried all of those things. But
Yeah.
the reality is, and here's the funny thing, Joe, I feel like the reality is goes back to my word of the year as well. Aside
Mm-hmm.
from what I mentioned, streamlining, I came up with this phrase early in the year. I call it holistic harmony. And it's because there's only so many, think of it as circle, right? And how many areas can you put your energy in for your life? You can't put 100% in all sections of your life.
Yeah.
So, having said that, go deeper into your streamlining method. I think you said there's a framework you've created.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that I focus on here. Because I want to be a solopreneur, right? I don't want to run a business or an agency. I don't want to get calls in the middle of the night. Like I left my agency job because big, busy agencies don't often jive with family life, in my opinion, right? People will dispute that. And so I want to remain a solopreneur. I want to remain flexible. And so I knew that if I needed to maintain solopreneurship while also being a present father and husband, I would need to automate as much as possible, and I would need to delegate as much as possible. And so I have a virtual assistant. She does, I'll tell you, I say this all the time. She knows she has leverage over me. If she leaves, I feel like my business will crumble. Like, and we have really good documentation in place, but if she's like out sick and I need to do something that I've tasked her to do, I know that she's much more efficient at it than me at this point. So I delegate my podcast. I edit my podcast, or I don't edit my podcast, rather. I have an editor for my podcast. And so I really just get to talk, right? And so on the, let's say the back end of my podcast, people are, delegation takes hold. On the front end of my podcast, it's mostly automation, right? I do the outreach myself because I am a human being and this is about relationships and I'm not just going to like let a robot do it. But once they are kind of in the pipeline, automation happens every step of the way. They fill out a form, the form goes to Notion, Notion kicks off a thing, I get a document, they get a document. And then on the after we record too, Dropbox and other automations kind of manage the communication between my team. So that I've removed myself from most of my processes unless I actually have to write words or talk or record a video. And the reason I can do that, which I think is maybe the framework that you were alluding to, is because I have been able to um, monetize my podcast and generate income I need to do that, right? It's a little bit of a chicken of an egg problem, right? How when do you if you don't have if you don't feel like you have the money to invest, when do you invest in these things? And so I'm happy to dive deeper into my podcast monetization framework, but as far as streamlining goes, automation and delegation are the things that solopreneurs can do to properly manage their time and their energy, right? Because if I was editing my podcast, it would be poorly spent time for me as far as like billable hours go. And it would frustrate me because I hate editing. So I'd be just like in a funk the rest of the day and I wouldn't be as effective in the things that I'm really good at that I love doing, which is interviewing and making videos and writing.
I can so relate to every element. I have been, at least until now, and hopefully next time you and I chat, this will have evolved and become more streamlined. While I have, I think they're called SOPs, like
Yeah.
basically, yeah. And
Standard operating procedures. Yeah.
yeah, I have several of those because from a very early process stage, I had the right, I would say friends. They were not necessarily mentors, but friends who would say, "Hey, Shilpa, you're going to need these things," and I took it seriously. So I have those, but those things, it would be so lovely at some point in the near future if I could hand off so many aspects. Because like you, I like the creativity part. I like engaging and having these type of conversations. And so much comes out of them, like instant moments of inspiration where you're like, whoa, here's a collaboration opportunity, or here's a talk, or here's something that can be done with it. So, having said that, I have one question that kind of goes big picture and then you can go deeper. The big picture is for those who are listening and going, well, okay, they're talking now deep about solopreneurship and podcast or business. How does this apply, though? Perhaps maybe just a one suggestion or tip on a more bigger scale as a parent, or just whatever stage you're in your life. You're like, well, how do I streamline so that I'm focusing on my why, my purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And it's something that I see a therapist weekly. This is another one of those things that like pre-pandemic Joe would have been like, you don't need that. Um, and one of the things that she has taught me about is overstimulation, right? As a parent. Especially, I mean, I'm gonna say especially a parent of three little kids who are like kind of always up your butt. Because again, on the nights my wife or the days my wife works, she works 312. She's home after dinner and bedtime. And so I pick up the kids. I'm trying to make dinner. Um, I'm maybe listening to a podcast, which is not the smartest thing to do when I'm trying to do these other things. But um, in that moment, it's really important for me to be focused on those tasks, right? Because if all of that is happening, and then I'm also thinking about that email I should have sent, or this quote that I have to do, um, that is when I get most frustrated because, and it's all my fault. And now I'm like taking it out on my kids, right? And so, no matter what stage of life you're in, solopreneurship, whether or not you're a parent, you probably have other, like a bunch of different areas of your life. And so, something that's really helped me is my shutdown routine. I have a shutdown routine, right? And so I try to do this before I leave my desk, but sometimes it's just kind of like word vomiting to my phone while I drive. Hands free, of course. I don't like people who use their phones, but like when I'm in the car and I'm just like kind of dictating stuff to my phone. Um, and I generally like to ask um a couple of questions, and everybody's going to have a different shutdown routine. Um, there's like the 10 points framework or something like that, but I like to ask myself these things. What did you accomplish today, right? Because that forces me to consider maybe I didn't do everything I wanted to do, but I got stuff done, right? So like one day I just wrote, I know I'm going to wonder what I did today, but there was a lot of business development. Like there was a lot of sowing seeds for future growth, right? And that's not a video or a podcast episode, but it's progress and it's necessary work. So what did I accomplish today? What's on my mind? This is the place for me to just be like, I didn't send that quote yet, and I'm still waiting to hear back from this client. And I think I want to do like one more review of the script for my next video. And oh, I should probably do a solo episode on this. Just everything is there, just to download it from my head to someplace. And then I write goals for tomorrow, right? So what are the things I think I want to try to do tomorrow? And open threads. And open threads is like this one has been crucial for me because it's similar to what's on my mind, but they're like really concrete. So if I'm halfway through an edit, right, of a video, because I do edit my videos, they're very simple edits and they're pretty easy for me. Or if I started to redesign my coaching page but I didn't hit save yet, right? I'll just write it there. Need to finish coaching page, need to finish edit. That way, again, by the time I pick up my kids from school, I have brain dumped everything onto, I use day one. It's a journaling app. You can use a piece of paper if you, I mean, you can't dictate to paper, but use whatever works for you. And that kind of clears the deck and clears my mind so that I know I don't have to just remember these things. And that has been so helpful for me.
And Joe, what was the name of that app you mentioned at the very end? The journal.
Day one, it's a journaling app. But this could be just like a notes app too, right? I like day, like I use day one for a lot of things. I do my personal journaling there. Um, but if you just use like Apple Notes or Simple Note or whatever, um, Evernote, if you use that, um, just a place to get that stuff down that's not just in your head, right? Because when we are distracted, we're not fully present, and we feel that we don't feel, um, we don't feel streamlined, but we're not focused on where we're putting our energy in the right place, right? Um, I can I can tell you that like I watched my wife worked Saturday, as we record this. She worked the previous Saturday, and I was very distracted. I was trying to finish a thing, and our refrigerator died. So I was researching refrigerators, and I was not at my best for my children. And so I guess also it's a work in progress, right? You're gonna have setbacks, but you know what? Saturday or Sunday, my wife could tell. I mean, anybody within like a 5 mile radius probably could have been able to tell. But my wife could tell, and she's like, "Hey, the Yankees are on. Why don't you go to the shed, smoke a cigar, take some time for yourself?" And then I came back like a new man. So being mindful of that is really important.
Yeah, everything you said resonated so deeply. Now, what I would love to ask is this approach that you take, where you log things like the shutdown method, or what you call it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Shutdown routine. Yeah.
your shutdown routine, which I love. Can you share, when do you then review or reflect on it?
Great question. So I will usually, honestly, sometimes I'll do it after the kids go to bed. Um, that's like if my wife is working late or like she just wants to veg and she's like cross stitching and like not talking. As we record this tonight, we have porch time, so we're gonna enjoy a beverage and just chit chat on our porch. But sometimes when the kids go to bed, otherwise it's kind of the first thing I look at the next morning. And the thing that's really keeping me tied to that is my goals for tomorrow. Like I know I wrote down what I wanted to do today here, and so I'm going to go check that, and then I'm going to see everything else, right? Um, and then as I process those things, I'll move the to-do lists into my to-do app. I'll move some of the on my mind stuff into my proper notes app. And so like day one is a place for me to just again dump everything, and I'll do the review either after the kids go to bed. That's like around my kids go to bed too late. It's like around 9 o'clock after, but um, or the next morning, like kind of my startup routine, right? Is look at the shutdown routine from the last morning, write down the meetings I have, and write down the things I want to accomplish today.
I love that. You and I might have to do a workshop just going deep on that because
Yeah.
I have a similar routine, um, and I'm constantly refining it because my challenge, I wonder if other people have this, is I'm too much of a perfectionist. I'm like, well, this has to be the routine. It has to be perfect. And why am I not sticking with it? So that self-sabotaging starts happening because you become your own worst perfectionist victim.
Yeah.
However, what I do try is it's continual, like you use the word work in progress. I'm work in progress. I'm continually trying to improve. And the night, in the morning, what I do is right after the meditation, which is my non-negotiable,
Mhm.
a 20 minute meditation. And then I do like my gratitudes. I literally allow myself to read and add to that list thoughts, aspirations, what I accomplished the day before, what will I accomplish the next day, wins. And sometimes I just want to skip over it. But honestly, just the act of doing it in the mind dump. So the mind dump happens in this note, what I call the wipe notebook. I write it down. I
Oh
have a
yeah.
Kanban. Like I write it
Nice.
down. Each day has a theme. So Monday is always admin day. Tuesdays are training. Wednesdays is always podcasting. So all of these methodologies, what you described and what I have as my sort of ever evolving approach, constant refining, I think we all need that. And I'm sure a lot of us have it, right? I mean, to stay mindful, how else are you going to get there without some procedures?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably a little bit mindset, a lot of it mindset, because I think it's easy, at least for me, to this was, I mean, before I had kids. The way things are today is the way things are always gonna be, right? Like, and so I'm gonna set this thing today and I'm gonna do it for the rest of my life. But then you realize that like you change jobs and your routine changes. Or if you're a student, right, your summer looks so different from your school year. Your first semester in college looks so different from your second semester in college, right? Maybe you have an 8 a.m. in the fall, but you have like a 5 p.m. in the spring, right? Your routine has to change because of that. And for me, like what accelerated that is when you have small kids, like they're in daycare, then they're in school, then they're in different school. If they get sick, your whole day is blown up. And that used to make me mad. But like, who am I mad at? Am I mad at my kid for getting sick? Yeah, that's ridiculous, right? Am I mad at the school for sending my kid home for being sick? Absolutely not. And so I realized, like, again, and this goes to like energy awareness, like I have all of this negative energy directed nowhere. Like it's just there. And so for me, it's like there are a couple of things I try to do every day. I'm not going to beat myself up. I have like I was having some neck pain this morning, so I didn't do yoga, right? And that's okay. I'll do it tomorrow, right? Um, and so I think that understanding life changes, things change depending on how old your kids are or how old your parents are. Your day to day can change pretty quickly. Um, and rolling with it and having just like something anchoring you, um, whether it's a shutdown routine, a startup routine, setting an intention for the day. Like it's like, okay, well, today, if I don't do anything else, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, right? Um, that can go a long way into like feeling productive, right? Or feeling like you're making progress.
Yeah, the two things come into mind. One is the word grace. I've learned to continually learn to give myself grace because I too have gone so difficult on myself and beat myself down. And particularly the dynamics and the routine of your lifestyle changes in different stages of your life. Like by the time my son was born, like if he's at home sick, that will change things. Like last week, I remember I had this clear agenda, what it was going to get done. I finished my last podcast, and the school called saying your son is sick, and
Yep.
so that shifted everything.
Yeah. Yep.
The second word that comes to mind is consistency, though, because like you said, if you have this shutdown routine and you have the momentum going with the intention you've set, that is pure energy and that will carry on to the next day, that pure good energy and how you want to manifest certain outcomes even if it did get done the day you would hope for it to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think that we need to give ourselves a little grace. And this is like the anti-hustle culture, right? Like I remember reading in one of Gary Vee's books. Okay, I didn't read the book. I read this excerpt. So, but he basically said like, hey, if you want to start a business and you have a 9 to 5, like the idea was like you got to hustle, and it was like work and then come home and have dinner and then work at night. And I'm like, yeah, just work. All you do is work. Don't think about anything else, right? I know people who I would say like, oh, like what do you like to do? And they're like, oh, well, like I'm a web developer, so I like making websites. And I'm like, no, but like, what are your hobbies? And they're like, oh, my job is my hobby. And I'm like, that I said point blank to someone, that is the saddest thing I've ever heard. Like, it's great to love what you do, but have other interests. Like, don't you are not your job, right? Like, what's the quote from Fight Club? Um, you're so much more than that. And to just like distill yourself down to one thing means that if you stop doing that one thing well, like you're gonna have like an identity crisis, right?
I've known people that we knew a couple whose wife was forced into early retirement during the pandemic, and is her husband would tell us like she's having an identity crisis because work was all she could do.
Yeah.
And this is why, like when you mention you do that the yoga in the morning, allowing yourself that space is something that maybe another generation ago they didn't recognize that as you are actually giving back by giving yourself that space. And
Yeah. And again, like it's I should also say because I keep saying that like I like male like typical male like John Wayne style and like don't get me wrong, I like John Wayne's movies. My dad was not like that. Like I just learned that from society, right? But like eventually I learned that like I am my own person and everyone's their own person, and yoga is one of those things like that. My brother Phil does yoga every day. My brother Phil is the exact opposite body type of me, so he's like built for yoga and I'm like built to be like a brick wall. um but like when he was like when he was like you should do yoga, I'm like that's stupid. Like men don't do yoga. I just think about like how dumb I was like 5 years ago. um and but it's been great, right? First of all, it's challenging. Like if anybody's like yoga is easy, like you've never done yoga before. But it's also it's like there's a nice on ramp where you warm up. I do 20 minutes, so it's like 3 minutes to warm up, then like a solid like 15, and then like two to, one of the instructors says like set your intention. One says give yourself gratitude, right? Um, focus on your practice. And it's like some of this is like kind of head in the cloud, like head in the clouds for me, but the ideas are there. Like set an intention. That's great. I'm not going to freak out on my kids today. Like there we go. There's the intention. I've set it. I have it as a goal for me today, right?
And those intentions, whether it's to be more present in your body or be more present in any aspect, it's really going back to recognizing that's the energy and how am I going to master that energy? Because, often we think it's out of our control, and that's where the ego and the anger and the
Yeah.
frustrations come in. But what if you are in control? But it takes these tools and allowing yourself space and grace to get there. Now, I have now more of a business question, leaning
Yes.
it back into the less less spiritual, more business. One of the things that caught my attention a long time ago is when you talked about sponsorship, and I haven't had the chance to go deeper into that topic, but I did share a little bit before I hit record. Maybe you could spend a few minutes enlightening those who are solopreneurs. Maybe take start from kind of high level, then bring it down. One of the biggest challenges, as you probably may have experienced, is that when you transition from, say, a corporate experience to becoming your own solopreneur, what have you, is the signposts are a little bit different. Sometimes there are no signposts. Sometimes there's no road. Sometimes it's a very dirty, muddy road, and you're trying to figure out how to get from here to this vision you have, because it's different when you're somebody's paying you day to day versus you're designing it. The good news is you're designing it. It does not exist. It could be
Right.
anything, right? But tell us about your journey and then how sponsorship then came into play, because for myself, as I shared, that's a huge a source of stress.
Yeah, it's almost like buying a house versus building a house, right? Like you've got, oh, I can pick between these three houses, or what do you mean I can build a house? Like, how do I even do that? Get some wood. I like that one. Can you build that one? And well, we can't really build that one. Um, so yeah, I absolutely resonate with that. When uh when I would talk at colleges or early stage like aspiring business owners or solopreneurs or freelancers, um, they would always say, like, what's the best piece of advice that you could give me, right? And I would say, build your network, because my network saved me. I left my agency job in June 2017. My first child, my daughter Teresa, was born in March 2017. Um, and I got a month paternity, which is something that then back in 2017, like men weren't always guaranteed that. And so I'm grateful for that. But when I got back, it was chaos. Um, we were struggling to find work. I'm happy to say like things are a lot better over there now, but we would hear things like if you want to be paid on time, you're going to have to work this weekend. And I'm like, that's not the social contract that we have. I work for you for the steady paycheck. If I wanted to get paid based on the jobs I complete, I could do that myself. And I had done that myself. Um, and then I think the final straw was like I had to work super late one night. And then I was told I had to work that weekend. And my wife and I were celebrating our anniversary. We had tickets to Hamilton. And so I was like, hard no on that. I'm like, sorry, you won't see me until Monday. Um, and I think in that moment I was like, okay, I could say no to that. I I could say no to this in general. And so I talked to my wife because again, we had a 3 month old at home and I think she took 6 months. Um and we were approaching like her unpaid leave, which is another thing that upsets me and bothers me. But I knew I'd be the sole breadwinner, right? And she was fully supportive. And so I left my job, and I quickly realized that side hustle money, which is what I was making, is not full-time job money. And so um I reached out to my network and I said, "Hey, I miscalculated like how much work I'd have lined up. Um, is there anything that is there anything I can do for you?" Right. And my friend Sean needed video work done. Um, so I worked with him for a while. He's a friend and mentor. And then a I had my podcast. My podcast was a little over a year old at this point, and I had some sponsors here and there. I was sponsored from day one. Um, but again, a company in my network reached out to me, and I should say network, like people I've met at conferences. Um, and they said, "Hey, you reach our audience. We'd love to sponsor your podcast." And I was like, "Oh, great." And I just said like, "What about $10,000 for 6 months?" And they were like, "Yeah, great." And they paid it up front. And that gave me enough runway to actually put a system in place and get client work and get more sponsors. So my network and my podcast saved my business. Um, since then, I've come up with this, I call it the smash framework for how to make money podcasting, right? And I think I've been talking for a long time, so I'm going to pause right after this in case you want to get in some thoughts. But um, I think that if you're going to streamline your process and automate and delegate, especially, like, you do need some funds for that. And so I like to try to square that circle, right? And help people make money as well.
And Joe, do you, and we'll go deeper into the SMASH framework in a moment, but do you also now have other source of income, or is it strictly from the sponsorship for your podcast? How many podcasts do you have at this point? And I'd like to understand that model that then applies to supporting other projects, so to speak.
Yeah, this is a great question. If you had asked me this 3 years ago, I would say like, yeah, 50% of my income comes from podcast sponsorships. That's not the case today, right? Economies change, budgets change, and I think having any freelancer who had one big client who left them will tell you, don't just have one big client, right? Because that's worse than just having a full-time job, because at least if you get fired, you get a severance, right? A client can leave you in the lurch, right? Like one big client. And that's where I was at with sponsorships last year. I realized that most of my income relied on sponsorship, and nobody wanted to sponsor podcasts last year, or at least nobody wanted to sponsor small podcasts last year. Um, and so today it's probably like 25% sponsorships, um, 50% coaching and services, things like that. And then the other 25%, like a hodgepodge of like courses I've made, LinkedIn Learning, um, and a couple of other things. But all of this ties into the Smash framework, right? And so I think there are 5 ways that you can make appreciable money with your podcast. I'm going to exclude products, right? I was at a career day for my kids' school the other day, and they're like, "Oh, do you have merch?" And I'm like, "No, because my audience is not huge and doesn't they don't want to wear my logo. Like, they don't want to pay to wear my logo, right?" And so I don't have merch. I think you need a very, very big audience to have merch, or like a particularly clever design, right? Um, so the first S in Smash is sponsorship. Advertisers pay you to talk about them on your show. This is a tough road, but there are ways that we can make it easier. M is membership. This is where your listeners pay you directly for benefits for your show, either ad-free shows or longer shows or just bonus content. This is tough. If you have a small audience, you're going to need a high dollar, high value membership. If you have a bigger audience, then you can get away with like a $10 or $5 a month membership. I have a $7 a month membership that is um if it was within Google, they'd kill it, right? Like it wouldn't be a product for them worth offering, but it's worth it for me for a couple of reasons. A is affiliates, so you get a commission for products you promote. The trick here is finding good affiliate programs. You don't just want to do like Amazon affiliate links because you won't make any money off of that, but like ConvertKit's affiliate program or Circle's affiliate program are very generous and recurring and like 30%. Um, the second S is selling, right? Or maybe like today I would probably um change. No, selling is probably still the right word. You're either selling a product or a service. And so your podcast helps you do that, right? You're talking about you sell water bottles, and so you talk about all the times that you might need a good water bottle, right? Or like why the $100 water bottle is really good for people who hike, right? Um, Contrived answer, but that's you're using your podcast to sell what you make. And the H is helping, right? And this is coaches, consultants, course creators. You are using your podcast to establish your authority and expertise in your space so that people know, like, and trust you faster so that they're more likely to hire you. That is how I best help people. And that is how you can, how I think that most business owners can make money. Um, Not the easiest way, but the best way for them, right? Um, and that's part of the reason for my whole rebrand and realignment is that my podcast was mostly interviews and I wasn't really promoting my expertise. And I want to do that more effectively.
So, oh, so much of this really just completely makes sense because I've been refining my own approach to podcasting. Up till now, it has been conversation with experts and then on occasion solopreneur, solo casts, so to speak. Now, the last thing that you mentioned, though, that making that shift in the paradigm for you, does that mean fewer conversational guest podcasts or you going in as an authority on a topic and going deeper?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I have moved from 100%, well, we'll say like 99% interviews to last year it was like 80-20. This year it's close to 75. It's like 75-25. I want it to be 50-50. And there's a few reasons. One is because I want to present myself as an authority. But the other is that interview podcasts are time consuming and there are a lot of them. And I say this as somebody who's doing more guesting. Um, and like we're on an interview show and I have an interview show, but I think that a straight up interview show is not the best way to go today. It is good to have interviews and mix it up. You're not locked into one format, but I call it a mini podcast, but like a solo show, um, I think is a really good way for you to create content, to establish yourself as an authority, and then you can focus on the content versus all the logistics of getting a guest and figuring out, oh, does their mic work? Do they have headphones? How's their internet connection? Now I have to edit. I have to combine these. This is going to be a pain in the neck. They went on a weird tangent that I need to cut out. So I think that, yeah, I'm trying to get to 50-50 for that exact reason.
And Joe, can you maybe educate me when you say 50-50? Like, I get it because I do like one or two solo casts. When you choose to do those solo casts, are you very intentional, systematic in the sense like, I mentioned earlier that I have themes and seasons and then I go deeper and then each one potentially ties to something that I could potentially monetize off of like an evergreen course. I'd like to understand that model.
That would be really smart. Uh, I view the Streamlined Solopreneur and those solo episodes as more of a build in public type of thing for me. And so right now, for that podcast, no, those solo episodes are not tied necessarily to a launch, right? I always promote my mailing list and my automations, library, especially. I talk about my membership. But for me, those solo episodes are really about building trust, getting people to understand my process, maybe getting their ears to perk up and be like, oh, maybe Joe can help me with that. And so this year is a little bit of an experimental year for me because I am doing more solo shows. But the next one coming up as we record this um is called Why We're Not Doing Summer Camp, right? Um, and how it's affecting me as a solopreneur. And I think it's just really helpful for other solopreneurs to see that and understand, you know, uh, what they're going through is possibly what I'm going through, and vice versa. How am I running my business at the same time? And then I talk about how I've automated stuff and how I have these systems in place. And the subtext is, and I can help you do that too.
That is so awesome. Now, you mentioned you have three podcasts. The 50-50 approach, is that for the new Streamline Solopreneur podcast?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Streamlined Solopreneurs 50/50. Podcast workflows is 100% solo episodes. And they're usually narrated versions of the articles I write for the website. And then Start Local is a podcast me and my friend run, or me and two of my friends run, where we interview business owners and nonprofits in our area. And that is 100% interview.
Wonderful. A nice blend. And that gives me plenty of ideas as well as I evolve my own podcast. Now, you mentioned that it's a generation currently, at least the way I heard it, is a solo podcasts that are interview based may not be necessarily, I don't know, as popular, or did I not understand correctly?
I mean, I think it depends. I think that there's a lot of them, right? And so if you're going to do that, you need to differentiate. I think uh Shilpa, that you described this to me as a casual conversation. I think that if this is working for your first of all, if this is working for your listeners, great, keep doing that. I think listeners want more than like maybe a raw, casual, unedited conversation at this point, right? Um, People look to like Joe Rogan and Dak Shepard, and they're like, well, they're doing it that way, and maybe we don't know how much editing goes on behind the scenes for them, but also they're celebrities interviewing other celebrities, and so people are just kind of inherently interested in that, right? Nobody would watch Keeping Up with the Casabonas, but they watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Um, and so if you want to deliver value and impact, then if you're going to do an interview show, you should weave it in some sort of story where there's a very clear outcome, especially if you're a business owner. And I think that having a podcast mission statement really helps with that. So when I help people with their mission statement, it's usually something to the effect of my podcast helps specific audience solve the problem of specific problem they're having by, and then the goal of each episode, right? So the mission statement for the Streamlined Solopreneur, I wrote it down and I can read it to you verbatim, is my podcast. Can I read it verbatim? It's somewhere around here. My podcast helps busy solopreneur parents solve the problem of spending their time properly by showing them how they can save 12 hours each week working in their business, right? And so the people I interview hopefully help my listeners do that in some way, right? By telling them, forget, like, don't worry about the tool you're using, think about how you're using the tool and how it helps you achieve a goal. Or with my solo episodes, right, one coming up on time tracking, why you should time track, what tool you should use to not make you overwhelmed, and how this will help you in the long run, right? You'll see that you waste a ton of time. Um, so that's the mission statement. And whenever I have somebody on the show, I have that in my mind, and I think, what story can we tell around this, and how are they helping my listeners achieve their goal?
That's wonderful. And I definitely feel like this it sort of reaffirms that while I continually fine tune my approach, just this month will be on energy awareness and just the notion of how are your workflows? What are you using? What tools? How can you refine them? That is applicable most definitely to solopreneurs, but also, like you were saying, parents and those who are in different stages in their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think this works for anybody and everybody, but the people that I'm helping specifically are parents, because that's where I'm at. And I feel like that's an underserved market in some senses.
Wonderful. So, before we part ways, Joe, one quick request. I really feel this was immensely fruitful for myself, my target audience, which are soulful female entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and those who are pivoting or transitioning in life and wanting to just really time manage. Could you take just a short moment? Would you be open to leaving a review that like a testimonial, 15 to 20 seconds, so that when I showcase this podcast, others can also hear it? And since we're recording, might as well not hit stop.
Yeah, so you want me to give a testimonial about this show or about our conversation?
Both.
All right. Well, yeah, I had a great time talking with you, Shilpa. I think we covered a lot of really great and helpful topics for your audience, as well as anybody who's struggling to um kind of optimize their time so that they can be fully present for um every aspect of their life, because this is something I think that we are losing in the age of having a little piece of glass in our pocket that can interrupt us at any moment. And so thank you for asking such great questions and for giving me this platform to share my story. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Joe. Such value came out of this podcast, and I just loved your personality coming through, your authenticity, and I would love to have a follow up conversation in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Shilpa. I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely.